starting us off like we always do, number 10, we're starting off with the world's oldest drug mule. This right here is 91-year-old Leo Sharp. He was actually released early from prison because he's terminally ill. I didn't know that this was a thing, that, you know, terminally ill people who committed horrible crimes can just be released. Maybe this is just a one-off. Leo Sharp drove a ton of drugs for El Chapo's cartel. He mostly drove cocaine, killing people along the way. It's unknown how many people he's actually killed, but there's a pretty big death toll, and this is all because of El Chapo's cartel. El Chapo is a very dangerous guy who has been in and out of prison his whole life. He has actually escaped a couple times from prison as well. This guy's worth $1 billion, and he has so many people working for him, including this guy we're talking about right now, Leo Sharp.
Moving on to number 9, we have Jesse Pomeroy. Jesse Pomeroy, otherwise known as the Boston Boy Fiend or the Boy Torturer, was convicted of countless murders at the age of 14 in 1875. He would abuse, torture, and then kill his victims. In fact, he was the youngest person in the history of Massachusetts to be convicted of first-degree murder. When Jesse was caught, he admitted to the murders and was sentenced to live in the Westboro Boys Reform School until he was 18. However, while at the school, he went on to commit other murders. That's when he was sentenced to prison and was placed in solitary confinement. His only interactions were with his guard and his mom, who would visit him once a month. In our 8th spot, we have Ianmanuel. In 1990, when Ianmanuel was only 13 years old, he shot a woman in the face, blowing out part of her jaw during a robbery. Thankfully, she survived, but as a result of his crime, he was tried and convicted as an adult. As a result, he was sentenced to 65 years in prison. He was one of the youngest inmates in the Tampa State Penitentiary. Manuel spent 15 plus years in isolation, making him the longest serving inmate in solitary confinement in Florida. Eventually, he was released after the woman he shot actually fought for his freedom, claiming everyone does dumb things when they're young, and she didn't want him to waste his life in jail. In our 7th spot, we have Ian Brady. Between 1963 and 1965, Ian Brady and his accomplice tortured, abused, and killed 5 individuals. They would bury their bodies on the moors outside of Manchester, which gave them the name the Moors Murderers. The crimes they committed were horrific, and Brady expressed no remorse. As a result, he was held in solitary confinement. His only contact with the outside world was through letters. It's said that on his free time he would memorize whole pages of Shakespeare and Plato and then recite them to himself. He would also often interact with television programs. Brady died in prison on May 15, 2017 at the age of 79. Making our way down the list, number 6, we have Dennis Rader. Between the years of 1974 to 1991, American serial killer Dennis Rader took the lives of 10 individuals. In 2005, he was convicted for his crimes, and now he's facing 175 years in solitary confinement without the possibility of parole. Now, Dennis likes to go by the name BTK, or the BTK Strangler, which stands for bind him, torture him, and kill him. So that says a lot about who this guy is. But thankfully, he is locked away and has no chance of escaping. To this day, Dennis is considered one of the most diabolical serial killers in American history. We are now at our 5th and halfway mark with John Massey. In 1975, John Massey got into a fight with a pub's bouncer and he shot him in the chest. At the age of 26, he was sentenced to life for murder. But while in prison, Massey managed to successfully escape 3 times. His most notorious escape was when he made a makeshift rope out of sheets and a pair of heavy-duty gloves to climb over the prison wall. As a result of his escapes, he was placed in solitary confinement. He was allowed 15 minutes outside of his cell each day, and had only 8 minutes for a phone call. Other than that, he was kept locked away. He is considered one of Britain's longest serving prisoners. He was eventually released after spending nearly 43 years behind bars. In our 4th spot, we have Thomas Silverstein. Thomas Edward Silverstein was an American criminal jailed for armed robbery in 1978. But while in prison, he committed numerous other crimes. In 1983, he killed a prison officer who he stabbed multiple times. Then he murdered 2 inmates. As a result, he had to be detained in a specially designed cell at the ADX Florence Federal Penitentiary in Colorado. Due to the crimes he committed while in jail, he is considered the most violent prisoner in America. He is also referred to as America's most isolated man. Now, Silverstein was considered so dangerous that he got transferred to a federal prison in Atlanta. There he was confined in a 6 by 7 foot cell. He was constantly under surveillance. In fact, the lights in his cell were never turned off so that they could always keep an eye on him. Silverstein eventually died in prison at the age of 67. He is said to have served the longest term in solitary confinement in the federal penitentiary system. Coming in at number 3, we have Eileen Wernos. Eileen Wernos, often referred to as the Damsel of Death, was found guilty of killing 7 men. She claimed it was self-defense, but then later pleaded guilty to the murders. She would murder them, rob them, and then drive home in their cars. Due to this, she was named America's first female serial killer. Now, Eileen was placed in solitary confinement for quite some time, but then she started to grow paranoid. She thought that the people making her food were spitting in it, and then she also claimed that she was being attacked by a sonic weapon. As a result, she wanted the court to hurry up with her death sentence. On October 9th, 2002, Eileen died by lethal injection. Moving on to number 2, we have Elizabeth Bathory. Elizabeth Bathory, otherwise known as the Countess who bathed in blood, was a serial killer in Hungary back in the 16th century. It's believed that she had killed around 650 girls. She's also considered the most vicious female serial killer in all recorded history. It's believed that her husband was a big influence in her killings. Apparently, he told her to torture her servants. He said for her to pour honey all over them and then let the bugs eat them. But her killings didn't truly start until she met a witch named Anna Darvula. This witch told Elizabeth that bathing in the blood of the young would help her maintain her youth. And that's exactly what she would do. Eventually, Elizabeth was sentenced to life in solitary confinement. She was locked up in her castle's torture chamber. The windows and doors were boarded up with her inside. There was only a small hole in which food was passed in through. On August 21st, 1611, she passed away. And in our number 1 spot, we have Robert Mosley. Now, I've talked about Robert in my other video on dangerous criminals, and there's no way that I couldn't include him on this list. Robert Mosley is considered Britain's most dangerous prisoner. Mosley was originally convicted for 1 murder, however killed 3 more individuals in prison, which got him placed in solitary confinement. In 1977, Mosley and his fellow inmate held another prisoner hostage. They ended up torturing him for 9 hours before cracking his head open and killing him. Now, it's rumored that he may have ate some of that prisoner's brain. As a result, he was deemed the real-life Hannibal Lecter. After that, he murdered 2 more inmates, which got him placed in solitary confinement. In fact, he is locked up in a glass cell underneath Wakefield Jail. He spends 23 hours of his day there. Starting off this countdown, we have the Man in the Iron Mask. The Man in the Iron Mask is the name given to an unidentified prisoner arrested in 1669 or 1670. He was imprisoned during the reign of King Louis XIV of France. Now, what's so scary about this prisoner is how his identity was always kept unknown. He was forced to wear a mask that blocked off his face. Some say he wore a black velvet mask, while others reported that it was a full-on iron mask. Apparently, the guards were ordered to shoot this man if he ever removed the mask. On top of that, he was kept in solitary confinement with double doors. He spent the rest of his life there until he died on November 19th, 1703.
Coming in at number 9 is Arthif Rafe and Sebastian Burns. Funnily enough, I knew about this case beforehand because there's a very good Netflix docu-series about different crimes, and it's called The Confession Tapes, and this was that first case it actually explored. Highly recommend, but anyway, in Bellevue back in 1994, Arthif and his best friend Sebastian came back to Arthif's family's house for the holidays. All was well until the boys came back from a long night out to discover Arthif's parents and sister brutally murdered and his house a complete mess. After their murder, Arthif inherited basically everything his parents had, buying a new car, living a new lifestyle, and seemingly not mourning the loss of his family at all. Police in both the US and Canada suspected the 2 boys of killing killing his family in order to get their money. They slandered them in the news like there was no tomorrow, branded them as murderers, and then using the Mr. Big technique to extract a confession from them. This technique is actually illegal in the US, but legal in Canada where it was done. It involves undercover cops gaining the suspect's trust by involving them in illegal activities and then getting them to confess. Even with multiple alibis and no physical evidence, the undercover cop kept probing Burns to confess and he would make it all go away. I'm assuming in the hopes of making his life go back to normal, Burns did confess, and later on so did Arthur, even though their stories were completely different. Both were found guilty in 2004 of a triple murder and were both sentenced to 3 life sentences each, even though they've been in prison for the past 20 years. At first I thought, how could anyone murder their parents, but after doing this video and seeing how many people actually did, I was like, wow, this is a thing. This actually happens. At number 8 is Joshua Smith. Now in February of 2012, 14-year-old Joshua broke into his stepfather Chico's room and stole his shotgun. Right after that, he started shooting things around the house, and Chico and his daughter were able to escape his rampage by breaking a window and climbing through. Joshua's mother, Tamiko Robinson, was sleeping on the sofa when he shot her around 12 to 14 times at close range. And why did he do this, you may be wondering? Because his mother was being a mother. That's right, Joshua started hanging out with the wrong crowd and wanted to join a gang, do drugs, pop pills. He started coming home at ridiculous hours, so Tamiko gave him a curfew and told him to stop hanging out with these people, and that's what triggered him. He pled guilty to second-degree murder and will be in jail for anywhere from 30 to 50 years. Filling our number 7 slot now is Evan Miller. Now Evan's life was hard enough. By the time he turned 14 in 2003, he'd been in and out of foster care due to his stepfather continuously beating him and his mother abusing drugs and alcohol. One day he was hanging out with his friends and his neighbor Cannon, who also happened to be one of his mum's drug dealers. After spending most of the night drinking and smoking weed, Evan and his friends attempted to rob Cannon after beating him. Evan beat him with a baseball bat and then set his trailer on fire, and he later died from his injuries and smoke inhalation. When brought to trial, his friend was offered life with a chance of parole if he testified against Evan, which obviously he did. In 2006, Evan was sentenced to life without parole, and now at 28 years old, he may have a chance at a retrial, but for now he's still very much in prison. Now at number 6 is Jacob P. Ind. Back in 1992, when Jacob was 15 years old, he killed his mum and his stepdad. After enduring years of sexual, physical, and emotional abuse, Jacob hired another older teen to help him murder his parents. Then, in the morning of December 17th, they went to their bedroom where they were fast asleep and attacked them for 5 whole minutes using various gruesome methods, stabbing them, spraying their faces with bear mace, and shooting them as well. He never testified during his first trial since his defense told him he would pack up and leave if he tried, so he was sentenced to life without parole. After spending 25 years in prison, he was finally granted a retrial and the right to testify back in August of 2018. And his retrial hasn't happened yet, so we don't know the conviction as of yet. Coming at number 5 is Diana Ortiz. Diana was 18 years old when she moved to New York in 1983 to flee an abusive relationship, and that's where she eventually met her new boyfriend, who was double her age. The man introduced her to drugs like heroin, LSD, and cocaine, and convinced that the only way to sustain both their habits was to stage a robbery. Note, not a murder, just a robbery. The plan was sorted. She would pose as a prostitute in a parking lot, wait for someone to approach her, and then her boyfriend and some friends would rob him. However, on the actual day, the victim that pulled up to her started fighting with the men, and a brawl ensued and he was eventually shot. While they all ran off in separate directions, what they had no clue about was that the customer was actually an off-duty police officer, and he actually died a few days later. Diana turned herself in and was convicted of felony murder and was sentenced to 17 years to life. And after 22.5 years in prison, she finally went on parole. Imagine 22.5 years in prison. I'm only 21 right now, and I feel like I lived a long life. That's my life and then some, all in prison. I can't even imagine that. At number 4 is Quantel Lot. Now Lot's, like a lot of other kids on this list, had a troubled upbringing. His dad, mum, stepmom, uncles, aunts, basically everyone around him was addicted to cocaine, even getting high on it while he was still in the room at a very young age. He'd seen his uncle get shot multiple times because of drugs, and he himself was beaten beaten on a regular basis. By 14, he used to have bouts of getting very angry, then crying uncontrollably, and then amnesia about what happened. In 1999, he was play fighting with his stepbrother Michael. It started off innocently, as it always does. Michael sent a blow dart his way, Lots fired back with a toy bow and arrow, but then it turned very ugly and escalated into a proper fight. It ended with Lot stabbing Michael a few times and then ultimately killing him. He literally doesn't remember the incident whatsoever, he just remembers being told the next day that his brother was dead and he was the reason. He was tried as an adult, not a juvenile, and was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. Even though at 14 the state of Missouri thinks you're too young to legally get married, leave school, donate blood, get a tattoo without parental approval, yet you're old enough to be tried as an adult and then put away in jail forever. Filling in on number 3 slot is John Kasich. Back in 2009, John was 16 at the time when he put up an ad on Craigslist offering sexual services in exchange for money, and the very popular ABC reporter George Webber replied to his ad. When they finally met up for this kinky hookup, if we can call it that, John claimed that George pulled a knife on him, and as self-defense he stabbed George 50 times. Mind you, George was bound and being choked when this happens, so I don't know how he could have even pulled a knife out to begin with. And if it was really self-defense, why 50 times? Surely someone's dead after maybe a few, or at least injured enough for you to escape the situation. During his hearings and his confession tapes, you can see him literally wink and smile throughout. At 18 years old, John was found guilty and was sentenced to 25 years to life, and at 28 years old, he's still in prison today. Now at number 2 is Ashley Jones. Ashley was a problem child raised by problematic parents. Her stepdad used to sexually molest her, and her mum was a drug addict, so it appeared to be a blessing when her grandparents agreed to take in her and her sister. I don't know if they agreed to take her in or her parents kicked her out, since she stabbed both her dad and her pregnant mum a year beforehand. Luckily neither died. A year later, at 14 years old, she was disobeying her grandparents more and more, and she was dating a boy they didn't approve of. The couple hatched a plan, and she helped her boyfriend commit a series of murders. First, they killed her granddad, shooting him twice in the face and then stabbing him to death. Then her aunt, who they shot in her sleep, and then set them both on fire. They also attacked her grandmom, who also got burned on the face, stabbed in the chest and jaw, and shot in the shoulder. Luckily, she survived, and she also tried to kill her own 10-year-old sister by stabbing her 14 times, but she also survived, thank God. Now at 24 years old, she's still in prison serving out her life sentence. And finally, at number 1 is Erin Cathy. Way back in March of 2008, Erin started dating a boy called Charlie Wilkinson. Story seems pretty kosher so far. After meeting Charlie, her parents felt like there was something off about him but didn't worry too much, but then Erin started to change. Her interests changed, her demeanor changed, and her parents thought Charlie was a bad influence and wanted them to break up. So what do any desperate teenagers do in that situation? Hatch a plan. Charlie and his friend Wade went into Erin's house while she waited in the car with Wade's girlfriend and shot Erin's mother Penny, whilst also nearly decapitating her with a katana. As if that wasn't bad enough, they then set the house on fire and it was completely ruined. Erin's father was also really badly injured. They shot him nearly 11 times whilst they killed Penny, but luckily he survived and was able to escape the house before it completely went up in flames. I mean, I don't know how lucky that is considering he survived his wife and kids and his remaining child is in jail, but it's still a good sign. Initially, no one suspected Erin, but during Charlie and Wade's questionings, they both said that the murders were Erin's idea. At 17 years old, Erin pleaded guilty to murder, as did Charlie, and they were both given 2 consecutive life sentences plus 25 years. Starting us off with number 10 are Katherine and Curtis Fairchild Jones. In Melbourne, 1999, at 13 and 12 years old, Katherine and Curtis became the youngest people ever charged as adults for first-degree murder. The two shot their father's girlfriend Sonia and had plans to murder their father as well and another male relative for sexually molesting them. As soon as they had shot her, they realized what a huge mistake they'd made and they ran to their neighbor's house and said it was an accident. Even after evidence of abuse was found, no one did anything. No one believed the two were being abused and they were sent to jail. During their trial, they never brought up the abuse. Nothing about what they had endured was even mentioned. I mean, the man who was abusing them was convicted of sexually assaulting his girlfriend's daughter years prior. Why was this not brought up by their defense during their trial? I have no idea. Then the justice system failed them and they pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and were sentenced to 18 years and probation for life. They were both released in 2015 at 20 29 and 30 years old. That's basically your whole prime part of life all spent in jail.
Now at number 9 we have 92-year-old Drayton Curry. He is considered to be the oldest inmate in federal prison. Drayton was almost pardoned from former President Barack Obama. So the reason why he was waiting for Barack Obama to pardon him from jail was because Drayton was convicted and has already served 20 years for a non-violent drug conviction. Former President Barack Obama actually reduced sentencing for 1,385 individuals for non-violent drug charges, and hundreds of these inmates were released from prison. He said the sentencing back in the day was way too harsh for such crime. He served so much time, and it's probably just for like a weed charge or something, and it's insane because like here in Canada, weed's gonna become legal next year, and in some of the states, maybe the state that he was convicted in, weed's probably now legal. Moving into number 8, we have Arthur Schnipper, who is a 92-year-old man who was born in 1924. Just think about that for a second. He should be kicking up his feet and enjoying his retired life with family and friends, but instead, he has been convicted of aggravated murder in Montgomery County. His sentence was life in prison. Arthur has been behind bars since 1983. He has served 33 years so far. Arthur, while he was 59 years old, shot and killed his girlfriend while he was wearing a disguise. Well, the disguise wasn't good enough because he was caught. His next parole hearing is in 2021, so that's in about 4 years from now. Arthur will be 96 years old. I'm not really sure how the hearing will go because he has already served more than life behind bars, and usually convicts are assessed to see, if they pose a danger to society, and if the answer is no, they're released. 94-year-old John Bunce, who is a retired chemist, comes into this list at number 7. This is New York's oldest prison inmate. He was convicted of brutally killing his wife. John beat his wife to death with a hammer. John hit her about 30 times. He was married to his wife for 68 years. This guy has gone insane. His wife was 89 years old, so this all happened back in 2010, and he was sentenced to just 17 and a half years behind prison, which means when he is 112 years old, he's gonna be able to maybe be released. John has had a history of trying to kill himself. In court, he was ordered to a mental test to ensure he was mentally fit to be sentenced. I think if you're able to kill someone, then yeah, you're mentally fit to do the time. Well, in 2014, he actually passed away. Number 6, we have our first female on this list, and we're talking about Lucille Keppen, who is 93 years old. Lucille is a widow who outlived all of her family members. Her husband and 2 sons have passed away. Back in 2002, she was sentenced away after she shot and seriously wounded Stephen Fleshy, and that was her 63-year-old neighbor. She pleaded guilty to first-degree assault. Lucille is one of the few people on this list to have remorse and to feel bad about what she has done. She has expressed forgiveness to the person she shot. She's in a very bad place right now. Moving on to number 4, we have another female on this list, and actually the oldest female on this list as well. This right here is a 100-year-old Ohedinesa who has served 19 years in prison. She was in prison for a murder. Ohedinesa actually went to jail with 16 members of her family who apparently were all involved with the murder. Her son, her husband died in jail while they were all serving a life sentence. Right now, she is not able to take care of herself at all. She is always in pain, she can't walk, and she can't really do anything. Maybe this is why she was released from prison, because she poses no threat at all to society. Number 3, we have John Fanzesi, who is 100 years old as well. John is an Italian-born American. He is a mobster who has been in and out of jail his whole life. Back in 1967, he was in prison for 12 years. This was after he was convicted of masterminding several bank robberies. Masterminding, maybe not so much because he was caught, so how masterful was he really? During the prosecution, people thought that John Fanzesi killed between 30 or 50 people, so for this he was sentenced to 50 years in jail. But like I said, he only served 12 years of that time. 4 years later, he was back in prison for a parole violation. He was jailed for 2 years at the time. In 2010, he was sent to jail for 8 years, which means he actually should be out next year. I'm not even sure if this guy has it in him to, commit any more crimes. I mean, this guy's 100 years old. Finally, number 1, we have a 108-year-old Hindu priest, Brej Pandey, who was convicted of murder back in 1987 when he was 84 years old. Brej is India's oldest ever inmate and was the oldest person in the world that I was able to come across who is in prison. Well, he was released from jail after serving a lengthy sentence. He wasn't able to walk out of jail on his own. He was actually carried out by his relatives. It's just so crazy to think that this guy was able to outlive his prison sentence.